Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. I'm really excited to introduce you to Arthur C. Woods today. And our topic of discussion is all around teenagers' mindset, which is something that's really fascinating. And it's all around how to break free of entitlement around teenagers, which I think a lot of parents have a lot of questions around. So,
Yep.
welcome, Arthur. How are you doing today?
Uh, Doing great. Really glad to be here. Thanks for doing this with me, Shannon. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Arthur, just a little bit more about you. You are a certified life coach for teenagers. And what I love about what you mention in your work is that raising a teenager can be a very challenging task, but at the same time, it can be one of the most rewarding tasks for parents. Given the fact that you have the tools and the understanding of your teenager and also how to work with their mindset, is this correct?
There's no doubt that working with teenagers is living with teenagers, parenting teenagers, really difficult. But it can be so
Yes.
fun and it can be so rewarding and yeah. So I
Okay,
my
amazing.
whole desire is how can I help parents through that journey of raising a teenager and how can I help teenagers through that journey of being a teenager.
Yes, absolutely. And Arthur, when it comes to parents who you've worked a lot with, you often hear the question that they're really struggling with entitled teenagers. Can you
Yeah.
describe what is an entitled teenager? What type of behaviors do they exhibit?
Yeah, it's that whole idea of something is owed to me and I have done absolutely nothing to deserve it. And
Okay.
entitlement has been around since mankind has been around. I mean, we can go back to Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and Cain thought that he was entitled to the same blessing that Abel got from God, but Cain didn't do the work. Fast forward thousands of years, and now here we are in 2024. So we've all experienced entitlement, but for some reason, it seems like now more than ever, there does seem to be a greater sense of entitlement among these
Hmm.
younger generations. And I'm not throwing them under the bus because I love these younger generations, but I think
Hmm.
that's been allowed to kind of develop in them a little bit. And maybe some of us older guys are to blame for that. Maybe we actually are the ones that created some of that entitlement in them. But yeah, it's just that idea of something's owed to me, and I've really done nothing
Okay.
to deserve it.
Yes. And you raise a good point there. How do you think we, as parents these days, have almost created this entitlement in our children?
Yeah, I think just as culture has shifted from a little bit less of an emphasis on hard work and sticking with
Mm.
something for years and years and years until it pays off, we've kind of more developed into something like we want the rewards now, we want the
Yeah.
the money now, we want this now, and we're not necessarily always willing to put the time and effort into getting to that point. And maybe that's been developing in us for generations, but we're
Hmm.
certainly seeing it now more in this fast-paced online social media world, and so
Yes.
I think we've got a couple generations now that are just like, this is what I want it now, and
Hmm.
it kind of, someone owes it to me. I don't know who owes it to me, but someone owes me this, and
Yeah.
that can be real. As a parent, that can be really discouraging to see in your own teenager.
Exactly. And I think there are so many parents that are feeling overwhelmed with their kids and their constant need for attention and their constant need for, you owe this to me just because. What
Yeah.
is the first change you recommend parents making to actually change this behavior?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes with entitlement, it can be attention seeking behavior. And
Okay.
one of the things we've learned over the years about attention seeking behavior is kind of counterintuitive, but sometimes the best way to respond to attention seeking behavior is to give that child or give that teenager, or in some cases give that adult, the
Hmm.
attention that they're looking for. Now, not necessarily in the way that they want it, because often they're seeking
Yes.
negative attention, but how do you give them positive, healthy attention? Because clearly they're craving something. And
Yes.
so if we can give that attention, I think that's a good thing. And then
Okay.
also, it's always just so important when it comes to entitlement. or really any behavior, to be honest, is to figure out the why behind the behavior. You know,
Hmm.
when I was growing up, there was so much like behavioral management. If if someone was acting up, our goal was to keep them from acting up. All right, you're not allowed to do that, so you're going to be punished if you do that again. I
Yes.
think as we've kind of developed as a society, we've realized, okay, this child, this teenager is acting in a certain way for a certain reason. Can we
Okay.
identify why? Can we help them process through why? Can we help them change their mindset so that they no longer even feel the need to act out in that way? And for
Okay.
sure, behavioral management still needs to be part of parenting. There are times as parents you need to step in, put your foot down
Yes.
firmly, and figuratively speaking, and make sure that you're holding your kids to limits. But I think it's so important. Let's address the
Mhm.
mindset behind the behavior of entitlement.
Okay. Before we continue with this next session, which I know you're eager to get into, I really want to remind you of something very important and exciting. You still absolutely have time to upgrade to the VIP Summit package. What this package is going to give you is a whole lot of tools and shortcuts and value for the summit, but in significantly less amount of time. So, if you are a busy parent and you are very serious on taking action, but you are short on time, this package is for you. You will gain access to all of the tools, but the shortcuts too, in a lot less time. So, do yourself a favor. Press pause on this video and click on the button to gain access to this package. It's so worth it. And what would you say when it comes to boundaries? How do we get our children to actually respect the boundaries that we put in place?
Yeah, well, one of the other things that I love coaching parents on is the idea of including their teenager in
Hmm.
the decisions. And
Okay.
again, I think when a lot of us were growing up, a parent never would have thought to include us in, hey,
Yes.
what are the standards we're going to have for our family? What are the consequences if we don't hit those standards? It was pretty much mom and dad makes the decisions, and we as the children, we as the teenagers,
Yeah.
we live
Just
by
abide by
that.
them.
That's exactly right. And but what does it look like to soften that a little bit
Hmm.
and say, all right, let's have a sit down conversation with our teenager and say, what are some of the expectations we have as a family? If we don't
Okay.
hit those expectations, what are some fair consequences? Or in some cases, what are some appropriate incentives or an appropriate reward for you to complete these expectations in a positive way? And at the end of the day, you're still the parent. You still get
Yes.
to make the final decision. No one's taking that
Yes.
authority from you, but it's just bringing your teenager into the conversation. I think that's so important.
Hmm. And I suppose it's also how we do it. I mean, I'm a mom of two, they're still quite little, but what I have noticed is that they really enjoy getting responsibility. But it's the discussions around giving them responsibility that makes them feel almost a little bit empowered. But it's how you discuss that responsibility with
Yes.
them, not in the form of punishment, but in the form of an opportunity to take up a little bit more power. Would you agree with this approach from a young age?
Yeah, I think so. Now, everything we're talking about is we're contextualizing it within a certain age appropriateness.
Yeah.
So some
Yes.
of my advice looks one way for your 13-year-old, another way for your 18-year-old, and a completely different way for your 3-year-old, but the
Yes.
fundamental concepts can really still be the same. So, to the degree that they're able to process this information and engage in a conversation, what does it look like you to have those conversations to say, "Hey, what do you think is fair? What do you think is reasonable? And if we
Mm.
don't do that, what do you think? What do you think a consequence should be?" Or and as long as they're engaged at to whatever level they're appropriately able, and they're engaged in that conversation, you might actually be surprised, or a parent might actually be surprised at how well they do with that. In fact, in my experience, when we start talking about consequences for not hitting certain expectations or standards within the family, I actually find that it's the children or the teenagers that select a consequence that is more severe
Yes.
than what the parent would have suggested. And that's when the
Yeah.
parent gets to look like the good guy and say, well, that's, you know what, let's maybe not go quite that far with the consequence. Let's maybe, what if we did this instead? And
Yeah.
then it's like, oh, mom and dad are great. They're not even as strict as I am.
Yeah. I'll step it back a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
And tell us, how did you get into this? Back in high school, how would you have described yourself? Were you entitled or were you quite a responsible person?
Not entitled, but definitely not responsible either. I've written a lot about this. At my time in middle school, in high school, and in college, academically speaking, was a disaster.
Mm,
I was disorganized. I didn't have proper mindsets. I was the kid who, man, if I got a C on a test, I was thanking God because I didn't see
mm,
those C's too often. And
okay.
a lot of that was just my own mindset um, around why I was doing what I was doing, who I thought I was. At that time, I carried an identity that I was lazy, that I was dumb, that I wasn't
Mm,
capable of doing better. And it wasn't until I got into adulthood. It wasn't until, in fact, I started a master's program where I was
yeah.
able to identify some of those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, and actually ended up doing really, really well in my master's program. But it took
Sure.
me, honestly, it took me until well into adulthood to start figuring some of these things out. And that's why I love being a coach for teenagers, because I get to help them figure out things that I may
Yeah.
not have figured out into my 20s, my 30s, in some cases even my 40s.
Exactly. And you can start from a much younger age, which then enables your adult life to be a little bit easier for you.
That's exactly right. And
Mm.
uh, I hope no one ever underestimates teenagers, and specifically because they are, if they're willing to, they are so capable of embracing these high end life skill concepts, these ideas of mindset and identity, and
Yes.
becoming a better person and embracing who you really want to be. They can embrace all these concepts that some of us never even thought of until we were adults, and maybe some of us still haven't even really
I
considered.
haven't. Exactly. And Arthur, you raise an interesting topic around self-limiting beliefs. Although,
Yeah.
is there quite a strong connection to mindset and your belief systems that you have about yourself?
Yes. Big, big, big time. I'm a big proponent of the idea that the mindsets we embrace, they ultimately overflow into our emotions, which obviously overflow into the behaviors and choices we make, and that all
Yes.
generates our outcomes. So if we're starting with healthy, positive, truthful mindsets, the likelihood is that we're going to end with healthy, positive, truthful outcomes. And obviously,
Hmm.
if you start with a negative, you typically end with the negative. So one of the best ways you can start with a healthy mindset is to start identifying those limiting beliefs in your mind. And a limiting belief, obviously, Shannon, you're aware of that, but in case someone's listening, I don't know what that term is. A limiting belief is really just a lie that we believe, usually about ourselves. It could be about someone else, it can be about the world, but usually in this context, we're talking about lies that we believe about ourselves. And I gave the
Hmm.
example earlier. I believed I was lazy. I believed I was dumb. Believed I couldn't do better. Once I started
Yes.
eliminating those limiting beliefs in my life, suddenly you're making wiser choices, and suddenly you're seeing better outcomes. So yeah, I mean, our
Yes.
mindsets and our limiting beliefs are intertwined.
Sure. It's absolutely fascinating. And tell us, when parents are experiencing really disrespectful behavior from their teens and they get to a point where they actually don't know what to do with it anymore, what's the piece of advice that you would give parents to almost not dive too in depth in this disrespectful behavior? Should they pause for a moment? Should they step back? Sometimes it can be very overwhelming for parents.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I used to work in a residential treatment facility for teenagers with significant behavioral disorders. So
Okay.
sometimes professional help is needed. So that is, I mean,
Yes.
that I put that out there. Sometimes
Mm,
you need to really seek professional help for your teenager. But in
mhm.
most cases, I don't think you have to. So if you're dealing
Okay.
with a teenager who regularly is showing that disrespect or that anger or that aggression, whatever it might be, I think there's two things you can look at in those moments where things
Mm-hmm.
seem out of control. All right,
Yep.
they're they're not going to listen to reason 99% of the time. The teenage brain is not developed enough to, in that moment of emotion, to go through to hear a rational, logical argument. In fact, even as adults with more fully developed brains, even when we get emotional, we're not always quick to
You
listen to
struggle
reason and
too.
logic. So that's a pretty tall order for a
Mm.
teenager. So in those moments, I think there's a couple things that we can do. We can, number one, we can take a timeout, literally, and just say, "Hey, we're both upset here. I get it. Can we
Yeah.
just go, for the next hour? Can we just go to separate corners? You go
Okay.
hang out, do what you need to do, calm down. I'll do the same thing. We'll come back together in an hour, and then let's talk about that."
Mm.
So I have found the timeout. It's funny. You think about timeouts. A lot of times you think of like giving a little kid a timeout, and
Exactly.
this isn't
Exactly.
right. And this isn't a punitive thing. This isn't go take a timeout. This is let's take a
Yes.
timeout together because
Together.
we
Healthier
don't want to
way.
say something we don't mean. And then I
Mm-hmm.
think the other thing is again really bringing that teenager into the discussion and help
Okay.
them empathize with you as the parent to say, I'm just going to be honest with you. This is what I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
I see your point, and but I'm really. Can you help me understand your perspective on this, or are
Okay.
you willing to at least think through what my perspective is? So before
Yes.
we're just saying like, here's the rule, here's the expectation, here's the standard. You can't do this. You can do this. Let's bring it back down to a discussion level.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
and it's tough because sometimes in the middle of an argument, there's just yeah, sometimes you
Neither
just need
side
to
wants
walk
to hear
away.
it. Absolutely. So you suggest it's almost like a partnership where each person gets the opportunity to voice their opinion and to voice what they're experiencing and how they're going through it. That does involve a lot of listening. Is that correct?
Yes, a ton of like active listening, and
Mm.
and not just active listening, but being willing to change your perspective or change your opinion based on what they say. And I do think it's important to say a second time, you're still the mom, you're still the dad.
Yes.
You still get to make the final decision. This is not giving your teenager equal authority. They don't have
Hmm.
equal authority with you. You are the parent.
Yeah.
But as the parent, you can bring them into the discussion, you can bring them into the decision, and they're going to feel a lot more respected and a lot more heard if you're able to do that. And they'll be
Yeah.
blown away if you're thinking one thing, they're thinking another, and because of something they said, you change your mind. Like look for
Hmm.
those opportunities where you can just say, for the sake of respecting him and or her and listening to him or her, I'm going to actually change my opinion on this. Sometimes
Yes.
you can't.
You
Sometimes things
can't
are just way too big to change. Sorry, you know, you're 16 years old. You don't get to do this.
do
But
this. Yes. And in your opinion, do you think that a lot of the areas where parents potentially are going wrong is that they're not having this open dialogue with their teens? They're just assuming and almost trying to push their opinions onto their teens without actually being more curious and asking them what's going on.
yeah, I think that is. I think what you and I are talking about is still a pretty rare thing in
Mm.
parenting in general. And that's not throwing
Definitely.
parents under the bus by any means. I love
Yes.
parents, and raising teenagers is not easy.
No.
But I think the majority of parents still today are saying, here's the rules, here's the expectations, here's the
Yes.
standards, you know, eh, no ifs, ands, or buts, no discussion, you know.
Mm.
Um, Whereas it's like,
Almost
especially
fear-based
here,
parenting.
in some cases, yes. I mean, I've certainly seen the fear-based parenting, and that old phrase, "Wait till your father gets home." That's
Yes.
that's a
Exactly.
form of fear-based
Sure.
fear-based parenting. But
Hmm.
um, I think I heard that once or twice when I was growing up, but
Yeah.
I may have
Definitely.
deserved it. But Yeah, so I think what does it look like to, especially as your children get into the teenage years and then they become older
Mm,
teenagers, like bring them more and more into the decision making and let them help you set the standards and yeah, and I say teenagers because I also don't believe that your job as a parent ends magically when they turn 18. And I know
mm,
different countries have different ages where someone becomes a quote unquote adult. But regardless of what the law says about when you become an adult, you're still the parent, well beyond teenage years.
mhm,
So
mhm.
but I just say all that to say, we're not just talking about young teenagers. We're still talking about 17, 18, 19-year-old teenagers who, yes, legally can make just about all the decisions any other adult can be, but you're still the mom, you're still the dad, and you still get a big say
Big
in
say in what they do.
in how they grow and develop and
Mm.
what they do. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think for parents to get a little bit more curious around their teenagers is a very valid point. How do teenagers typically perceive the world in their teens and in their adolescent years?
Well, I think some of that goes, we haven't used the word entitlement in a while. Okay, that's kind of where we started. But to bring
Mm,
it back to that, I think we see a perception of entitlement in these younger generations, and I don't think
yeah.
that was necessarily created by the parents, but they see it in their teenagers. So I think they're seeing the world through a lens in which maybe they think life shouldn't be as hard as life is
Mm,
turning out to be. Um, Whereas maybe some of us older generations are saying, like, actually, life is hard. Doesn't mean life's bad. I love life. Life's great, but life is hard. And
yeah.
but you work through it. You put the work in, and at the end, if everything goes well, there's the reward, there's the benefit, there's the growth.
Yes.
I don't know if we're seeing that quite as much in these younger generations, and I
Mm,
don't think it's too late to turn back. But I think these kind of conversations are very helpful to get we as parents and coaches and youth workers and whoever to start thinking about things a little differently than maybe we have in the past.
yeah, absolutely. And it starts with awareness, and then we can, continue to spread the awareness with more and more parents
Yeah, for sure.
and people globally. And what do you think happens to kids if they never grow out of this entitlement? What do their lives look like later on?
Yeah, well, we all know entitled adults. And unfortunately, I think entitled teenagers, if left to their own devices, become entitled adults. And then
Mm,
at that point, I think two things kind of happen. Either they stay entitled adults for the rest of their life, and that's a shame,
mm,
or they get uh, they get figuratively slapped in the face with a reality check
yeah.
because the world is not just handing them everything that they think they deserve,
Mm,
and they're saying, I don't understand this. I grew up and this is what I got, everything that I wanted, I got everything that I needed, everything was just handed to me. Now that I'm into my 20s, why is this so hard? Why do I have
yeah.
to work so hard to get what I think that I am entitled to? And yeah, I mean, that so I think that's the trajectory they are on, until we as parents or coaches or youth workers can step in and say, hey, let's try another way. Let's talk about another trajectory that we can get you on.
Yes, absolutely. Because essentially, it's also there's a link between victim mentality and entitlement, where you see it as you are obviously deserving of better, but you don't necessarily feel that you are empowered to take
Yeah.
action to get to that better place.
Yeah, and that's a tough. I mean, that's a tough conversation, and a controversial conversation these days. But to those who have been through serious trauma or they've had
Mm,
serious disadvantage, I have so much respect for those that say, you know what, things were not good in my past, and maybe things are not even good right now, but
Yeah.
I am not going to let that stop me. I am going to move forward. I am going to embrace some new mindsets. I am not going to be a victim regardless of who did what to me, regardless of how I grew up. I'm going to make
Yes.
this, like, I have so much respect for those teenagers and those adults that choose to embrace those kind of mindsets and just say, I ain't a victim,
Yeah.
because that's awesome. Because the second you say I'm not a victim, you are not a victim.
Absolutely. And actually push through, which is amazing.
Yeah. Yep.
Arthur, I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions now, which are
Yeah.
intended to be quite short and to the point. So, what would you say is your single best advice for parents in 60 seconds?
Okay. 60 seconds. Does the clock start after I've had 3 minutes to think about it, or we're already well into the 60
Yeah.
seconds? Uh, so I was a youth pastor for about 10 years. Now I've been a coach for teenagers and parents for the past number of years. And the one thing that I've had to tell parents so many times is great parents can also have highly, highly, highly difficult kids. You can be
Okay.
the best parent in the world, but sometimes the kids they're just going to struggle. And it's not because you were a bad parent. Don't let yourself spiral into that limiting belief of I'm not a good parent.
Parents, sure. I think that is such a powerful message for parents. Very, very powerful. Parents live with a lot of guilt. And I think
Yeah,
just allowing them to hear you say that would have a huge influence on them. So thank you for
yeah,
that.
yeah,
who,
absolutely.
who is your go to parenting mentor, would you say?
Yeah, so I'm very glad you asked this question because I 100% have one. And unfortunately, she did die of cancer a few years ago, but it's
Um,
some of your audience may be familiar with Karen Purvis, and
okay.
she created a framework for interacting with children and teenagers called TBRI, Trust-Based Relational Interventions. And it was created for kids who had behavioral challenges specifically, but it
Mm-hmm.
is so relevant for even the quote unquote perfect little angels who've never done anything wrong. It is based so heavily on relational based parenting. In fact, a lot
Okay.
of the conversation you and I have had today has been based on relationship type
Yes.
parenting, and a lot of where I'm get my gather my inspiration is from Karen Purvis, from her work. She wrote an incredible book called The Connected Child, and
Okay.
yeah, she'd be one that I highly recommend.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and
Thank
and
you.
even though she's
Amazing.
no longer with us, her work
Yes.
lives on in so many different ways.
Okay. And what was the one primary reason behind your decision to become an expert in the space?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a Christian family, and so I went to church and I went to youth group, and I had a youth pastor. He was a volunteer youth pastor named Ken, and he just spent so much time. I mean, he had a full time job, and it wasn't being a youth pastor, but he spent so much time with us for years. I mean, he was my youth pastor for probably all throughout middle school and high school, and I thought, man, like this guy's the real deal. And I just thought, man, being a youth pastor, at the time I thought, oh, being a youth pastor, that'd be really fun. Working with teenagers, that'd be really fun. And it is. But
Yeah.
at that young age, I also didn't realize it would also be really, really tough. But
Okay.
so when I graduated from high school, that's what I pursued a degree in. I got a bachelor's degree in student ministry. Eventually, I got a master's degree in student and family ministry. I worked at a residential treatment facility with teenagers. I was a youth pastor for 10 years. And now I've been a life and leadership coach for teenagers and families for about 3 years. So my entire adult life has been wrapped up in working with teenagers specifically. My wife and I were foster parents for a number of years,
Oh,
working
wow.
with teenagers in our house. And so it's just been kind of a passion of mine and my wife's for as long as we can remember, just about.
Sure. That's wow. Amazing. And tell me, what do you think parents will get out of actually watching this summit with a range of amazing experts?
I that the first of all, the range of amazing experts that you guys have is a very big range. Like I think last I looked, there were over 40 experts
Yeah.
coming to
Mhm.
be part of this summit. So I feel like regardless of what you're experiencing as a parent, there's going to be not just one, not just two, but probably several
Yes.
sessions that are going to be so relevant to what you're going through as a parent. And the price, did we talk about the price? Like I'm hoping not to get too salesy here, but free, no
Great.
cost. How do you how do
Don't
you
often
argue
come
with
across
that?
that.
Yes. So I mean,
Absolutely.
40 plus experts, no cost to the parents. I mean,
Mhm.
come on. That's great. So I feel like the parents can get out of this summit whatever it is they need, because every parent needs something, and there is such a this is such a wide buffet of options that
Mm.
it's going to be helpful wherever they are in their parenting journey.
Thank you. And Arthur, I want to say thank you for your time here today. We've learned so much from you. I think it's really, really helpful to hear you explain to parents that they need to open up a healthy dialogue with their children and
Yeah.
with their teenagers. And this is a real game changer. And I think a lot of parents aren't necessarily aware of that, and also don't necessarily feel like they have permission to do that.
Yeah.
And an expert like yourself actually gives parents the permission to sit down with your child, look your child in the eyes, and actually develop an open dialogue. Get curious with your child and what's going on in your child's world, which I think has the ability to transform your relationship with your teenager for sure. Would you agree with this?
Oh, yeah, I think I love the way you took our 30-minute interview and in 30 seconds encapsulated it, because that I couldn't have said that better. That permission, not that anyone needs my permission, but that permission for parents to engage in dialogue with their teenagers, because we didn't many of us didn't see that when we were growing up. And so for someone to come in and say, hey, it doesn't have to be quite the way it was when you were growing up. You can do things maybe a little differently and try some new things. So I
Mm.
actually love the way you wrap that up.
Okay, and that's wonderful to actually say it's okay to try new things as well, and
Yeah.
you'll see different results too. So I think it's all about really what you do is you really take teenagers and you give them the leadership skills to inspire future generations, which is truly amazing. So thank you for your work and thank you for your time. We've learned a lot from you and we really look forward to following you on all your future work. Thank
Oh
you.
yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity, Shannon, and yeah, parents listening, go be great parents.
Mm.
You're not horrible parents. Go be great parents, and yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time, Arthur.
All right, thanks, Shannon.